reading letters from my wife every day. They were so romantic. Until I noticed the writing style. Turns out, every word was written by her mom. Even signed, "Love you like you deserve it." So this is probably going to sound completely insane, but I need to get this off my chest because I feel like I'm losing my mind. 3 months ago, my wife got this amazing opportunity to work on a project overseas. It was supposed to be a 6-month assignment, and honestly, we both knew it would be tough being apart for so long. We'd never been separated for more than a week since we got married 4 years ago. The first week she was gone, I was a mess. I kept checking my phone constantly, hoping for texts or calls, but the time difference made everything complicated. She was always either sleeping when I was awake or working when I was free. I was starting to feel really disconnected and lonely, wondering if this whole long-distance thing was going to work out. Then the letters started coming. The first one arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I almost cried reading it. It was this beautiful, handwritten letter on cream-colored paper that smelled faintly of her perfume. She wrote about how much she missed me, about the little things she remembered about our morning routine, about how she'd been thinking about our future together. It was so romantic and heartfelt that I carried it around in my pocket for days, reading it whenever I felt lonely. The letters kept coming, about 3 times a week. Each one was more beautiful than the last. She wrote about memories I'd almost forgotten, about dreams we'd shared, about how grateful she was to have me in her life. Some of them were several pages long, filled with the kind of romantic declarations that made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. I started organizing my entire schedule around these letters. I'd wake up early to check the mailbox, and when a letter arrived, it would completely change my day. I'd read it over breakfast, then again during lunch, then one more time before bed. I started keeping them all in a special box on my nightstand, and whenever I felt down, I'd pull out a few and read them. The weird thing was, when we did manage to video chat or talk on the phone, she seemed different, more distant, tired, sometimes even a little irritated. I chalked it up to work stress and the time difference, but it was starting to worry me. The woman writing these incredible letters seemed like a completely different person from the one I was talking to on the phone. About 2 months in, I started noticing some strange details. The handwriting was definitely hers, but some of the phrases seemed off. She kept using words like darling and beloved, which she'd never used before. There were references to books she'd never read and movies she'd never seen. At first, I thought maybe she was just trying to be more romantic or had picked up some new vocabulary from her colleagues. Then I found the rough drafts. I was doing laundry and emptying out all the jeans pockets when I found a crumpled piece of paper. It was a draft of one of the letters, but it was in different handwriting. My blood went cold as I recognized the writing. It was my mother-in-law's distinctive, flowing script. I sat on the bedroom floor for about an hour, just staring at this piece of paper. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why would my mother-in-law be writing drafts of letters from my wife? It didn't make any sense. I started going through all the letters I'd received, comparing them more carefully. The handwriting was definitely my wife's, but now that I was really looking, I could see subtle differences. Some letters were written with more pressure, others with different pen types. It was like someone was trying to copy her handwriting, but couldn't quite get it consistent. The more I analyzed them, the more obvious it became. The vocabulary, the sentence structure, even the way emotions were expressed, it all sounded like my mother-in-law, not my wife. My mother-in-law had always been overly dramatic and romantic in her speech, using flowery language that my wife had always found embarrassing. I felt sick. All those beautiful moments, all those times I'd felt so loved and connected to my wife, they were fake. Someone else had been manipulating my emotions, playing with my feelings like I was some kind of puppet. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront my wife? Should I call my mother-in-law? I decided to wait and see if I could figure out more about what was going on. The next letter that arrived was the final proof I needed. It contained a reference to a conversation my wife and I had supposedly had about getting a dog when she returned. The problem was, we'd never had that conversation. But I had talked to my mother-in-law about it 2 weeks earlier when she'd called to check on me. I realized that my mother-in-law had been gathering information about me during our conversations and then incorporating it into these fake letters. She'd been asking me seemingly innocent questions about how I was doing, what I was thinking about, what I was hoping for, and then using all of that information to create these incredibly personal, targeted letters. The manipulation was so calculated and sophisticated that it made me question everything. How long had this been going on? Was my wife even aware of what her mother was doing? Had there been other instances of manipulation that I'd missed? I started remembering other times when my mother-in-law had seemed to know things about my relationship with my wife that I'd never told her. Times when she'd given advice that seemed too specific, too targeted. I wondered if she'd been interfering in our relationship for years without me realizing it. The worst part was that the letters had actually been working. I'd been feeling more connected to my wife than ever before, more in love, more committed to our relationship. Finding out that those feelings were based on lies felt like a betrayal of the deepest kind. I spent the next few days in a weird fog, not knowing how to process what I'd discovered. I kept reading the letters, but now they felt poisonous. Every beautiful phrase, every romantic declaration, it was all tainted by the knowledge that they weren't real. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I called my wife. Update. I called my wife last night, and honestly, I don't know if I feel better or worse after our conversation. When I told her about the letters, there was this long silence. At first, I thought maybe the connection had dropped, but then I heard her crying. She had no idea what her mother had been doing. Apparently, my mother-in-law had been calling her every few days, asking detailed questions about how I was doing, what I might need to hear, what would make me happy. My wife thought her mother was just being caring and supportive, trying to help her stay connected to me despite the distance. She had no idea that all of this information was being used to create fake letters. The really messed up part is that my wife had been struggling with feeling disconnected from me too. She'd been working insane hours, dealing with a difficult project, and feeling guilty about not being able to communicate with me as much as she wanted. Her mother had been telling her that I was doing great, that I was handling the separation well, that I seemed happy and content. So while I was getting these incredibly romantic letters that made me feel loved and connected, my wife was being told that everything was fine and that I didn't need more communication from her. My mother-in-law had been manipulating both of us, keeping us apart while making each of us think the other was handling the separation just fine. My wife was devastated. She kept apologizing, even though none of this was her fault. She felt guilty for not being more suspicious when her mother started asking all those questions. She felt terrible that I'd been getting these fake expressions of love while she'd been too busy and stressed to write me real ones. We talked for almost 3 hours, and it was the most honest conversation we'd had in months. We both admitted that we'd been struggling more than we'd let on, that the separation was harder than we'd expected, that we'd both been feeling lonely and disconnected. The weird thing is, some of the feelings expressed in those fake letters were actually real. My wife did miss me, did love me, did think about our future together. But she'd been expressing those feelings to her mother instead of to me, and her mother had been twisting them into these manipulative letters. After we hung up, I felt emotionally drained but also somewhat relieved. At least now I knew the truth, and my wife and I were finally being honest with each other about how we were really feeling. But I still had to deal with my mother-in-law. I drove over to her house this morning, and she was waiting for me with tea and cookies, acting like everything was normal. When I confronted her about the letters, she didn't even try to deny it. She just smiled and said she was trying to help our marriage. According to her, she could see that both my wife and I were struggling with the separation, but we were both too proud or stubborn to admit it. She thought that by sending me these letters, she was giving me the emotional support I needed while also giving my wife the peace of mind that I was being taken care of. She showed me a whole box of supplies she'd been using, different pens to match my wife's usual writing instruments, practice sheets where she'd been copying my wife's handwriting, even a bottle of my wife's perfume that she'd been using to scent the letters. The level of planning and deception was staggering. She'd been working on this project for months, crafting each letter carefully, making sure the handwriting looked right, timing the delivery perfectly. She'd even been keeping track of what she'd written in each letter to make sure the ongoing narrative was consistent. When I asked her how she could justify lying to both of us, manipulating our emotions, interfering in our marriage, she got defensive. She said that sometimes people need help communicating their feelings, that she was just facilitating a connection that already existed. She claimed that everything she'd written in the letters was based on things my wife had actually said to her, that she was just acting as a translator, helping my wife express her feelings in a way that would reach me. She insisted that she wasn't making anything up, just presenting my wife's emotions in a more articulate, romantic way. The more she talked, the more I realized that she genuinely believed she was helping. In her mind, she was some kind of relationship counselor, using her superior communication skills to strengthen our marriage. She couldn't understand why I was angry instead of grateful. I told her that what she'd done was a violation of trust, that she'd lied to both of us, that she'd interfered in our relationship in a way that was completely inappropriate. I explained that even if her intentions were good, the impact had been harmful, that she'd created a false sense of connection while actually keeping us apart. She started crying then, saying that she'd only wanted to help, that she could see how much we loved each other and just wanted to make sure we didn't drift apart during the separation. She said she'd been worried that our marriage wouldn't survive the distance, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing me as a son-in-law. I left her house feeling confused and angry. Part of me was furious at the deception, at the manipulation, at the way she'd played with our emotions. But another part of me felt sorry for her, recognizing that she'd acted out of love and fear, even if her methods were completely wrong. When I got home, there was another letter waiting for me. This one was actually from my wife, and I could tell immediately because the handwriting was shakier, more rushed, and the language was simpler, more direct. She'd written it right after our phone call, and it was raw and honest in a way that the fake letters had never been. She wrote about how scared she'd been that I was losing interest in her, how guilty she felt about leaving me alone, how much she missed our normal life together. She admitted that she'd been avoiding some of our scheduled calls because she felt like she had nothing interesting to say, that she was just tired and stressed all the time. Reading her real letter after months of fake ones was like finally getting fresh air after being in a stuffy room. It wasn't as polished or romantic as the fake letters, but it was honest and real, and that made it infinitely more valuable. I wrote her back immediately, telling her everything I'd been feeling but had been afraid to say. I admitted that I'd been struggling too, that I'd been feeling lonely and disconnected, that I'd been questioning whether our relationship was strong enough to handle this separation. For the first time in months, we were finally communicating honestly with each other instead of through the filter of her mother's manipulation. Final update. It's been 2 weeks since everything came out, and I'm still processing everything that's happened. The situation with my mother-in-law has gotten more complicated, but my relationship with my wife has actually gotten stronger. My wife decided to cut her overseas assignment short. She talked to her supervisor and explained that she had a family emergency that required her to return home. She lost out on some professional opportunities, but she said that saving our marriage was more important than any career advancement. She came home 3 days ago, and we've been spending every moment together, talking through everything that happened. It's been intense and emotional, but also incredibly healing. We've been more honest with each other than we've ever been before, and I feel like I'm finally getting to know the real her, not the version that her mother had been presenting to me. We've also been dealing with the fallout from confronting my mother-in-law. My wife had a long, difficult conversation with her mother, and it revealed some things about their relationship that my wife had never fully understood before. Apparently, this wasn't the first time my mother-in-law had interfered in our relationship. She'd been subtly manipulating situations for years, always with the justification that she was helping or protecting us. She'd been screening my wife's complaints about me, editing the information she passed along, and generally trying to manage our relationship from behind the scenes. My wife realized that some of the fights we'd had over the years might have been influenced by her mother's interference. Times when she'd been angry with me about things I'd supposedly said or done, but that I couldn't remember happening. Times when I'd felt like she was overreacting to minor issues, but it turned out her mother had been amplifying those issues when she relayed them. The letter situation was just the most elaborate example of a pattern that had been going on for years. My mother-in-law had been positioning herself as the expert on our relationship, the person who understood both of us better than we understood ourselves, the one who could solve our problems and improve our communication. My wife was devastated to realize how much her mother had been manipulating both of us. She felt like she'd been living in a bubble, getting a filtered version of reality that her mother had been carefully crafting. She started questioning everything her mother had told her about me, about our relationship, about what I needed or wanted. We decided that we needed to establish some serious boundaries with my mother-in-law. We're not cutting her out of our lives completely, but we're limiting her access to information about our relationship and making it clear that any future interference will not be tolerated. My wife had to have a very difficult conversation with her mother about respect and boundaries. My mother-in-law initially tried to defend her actions, but eventually broke down and admitted that she'd been scared of losing her daughter and had been trying to control the situation to prevent that from happening. She revealed that she'd been terrified that our marriage wouldn't survive the separation, that I would find someone else, or that my wife would decide she preferred her independent life overseas. She'd been trying to keep us connected and in love, but she'd been so afraid of losing control that she'd ended up creating the very problems she was trying to prevent. The fake letters had been her way of trying to guarantee that I would still be waiting for my wife when she returned, that I would still be in love and committed to our relationship. She'd been crafting this perfect romantic narrative to keep me emotionally invested, not realizing that she was actually preventing us from dealing with the real challenges of our separation. In a weird way, I almost understand her motivation. She could see that we were both struggling, and she wanted to fix it. But her solution was to create a fantasy instead of helping us face reality together. My wife and I have been working on rebuilding our communication skills. We're learning to be more honest about our feelings, even when they're difficult or uncomfortable. We're practicing having conversations about problems instead of avoiding them or letting other people filter them for us. The experience has actually made our relationship stronger in some ways. We've learned that we can survive deception and manipulation, that we can work through difficult situations together, that our love is real even when it's been tested by fake substitutes. I still have mixed feelings about my mother-in-law. I'm angry about the manipulation and the lies, but I also recognize that she was acting out of love and fear. She made terrible choices, but she wasn't trying to hurt us. She was trying to protect something she valued, even if her methods were completely wrong. My wife has been the most affected by all of this. She's had to confront the fact that her mother, who she trusted completely, had been lying to her and manipulating her for years. She's been grieving the loss of the relationship she thought she had with her mother, while also trying to figure out how to build a new, more honest relationship. We're taking things day by day. Some days are harder than others, but we're committed to working through this together. We've learned that our relationship is worth fighting for, that we can survive challenges and come out stronger on the other side. The fake letters are still in a box in our closet. We haven't decided what to do with them yet. Part of me wants to burn them, to erase all evidence of the deception. But another part of me thinks we should keep them as a reminder of what we've learned, of how important honesty and communication are in our relationship. Looking back, I can see warning signs that I missed. The disconnect between the letters and our phone conversations, the way my mother-in-law always seemed to know exactly what to say to make me feel better, the way she'd been gathering information about my feelings and concerns. But I also can't blame myself for not seeing it. The deception was so elaborate and well executed that it would have been difficult for anyone to detect. My mother-in-law had been studying my wife's handwriting for years. She knew both of our personalities intimately, and she had access to real information about our relationship that she could incorporate into the fake letters. The whole experience has taught me to trust my instincts more. When something feels off, even if I can't put my finger on exactly what's wrong, I need to pay attention to that feeling. It's also taught me the importance of direct communication, of not relying on third parties to mediate or interpret my relationships. Most importantly, it's taught me that real love is better than perfect love. The fake letters were beautifully written, romantically perfect, exactly what I wanted to hear. But they weren't real, and that made them ultimately hollow and meaningless. My wife's real letters, with their imperfect handwriting and simple language, are infinitely more valuable because they're honest expressions of her genuine feelings. I'd rather have one real, flawed letter than 100 fake perfect ones. We're going to be okay. It's going to take time to fully rebuild trust and establish new patterns of communication, but we're both committed to doing the work. We've learned that our relationship is strong enough to survive deception, manipulation, and interference from outside sources. The fake letters were meant to control me, to manipulate my emotions, and keep me attached to a fantasy version of my wife and our relationship. Instead, they ended up teaching us both the value of authentic communication and honest connection. In the end, the truth really did set us free.